Welcome, everyone, to Building Civic Strength, a series of community conversations and a partnership of New Hampshire Civics and New Hampshire Public Radio. We are kicking off our series tonight in Franklin at the historic Franklin Opera House. We have an impressive virtual audience joining us as well, so welcome to everyone. We're here to explore some fundamental questions on the minds of many people these days, with concern that America's political and cultural divisions are weakening our nation's civic health. And so throughout this series, we'll ask, what is at the heart of civic strength? How can we achieve it? Do we have the knowledge, the skills, and the will to do so? A special focus of this series will be on civics education. What does the next generation need to understand and appreciate in preparation to lead our communities and our country? Tonight in Franklin, we have 4 guests who will ponder these questions with us. I'm very pleased to introduce them. They are Pedro Altagracia, civic engagement advocate who worked for more than a decade in New Hampshire on issues including diversity, public health, juvenile and criminal justice. Pedro, it's great to see you, to finally meet you in person. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Also with us, Jo Brown, Mayor of Franklin. She's the owner of a downtown business and a military veteran. And Mayor Brown, nice to see you in person again. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also with us, Kelsey Brooke Eckert, Coordinator of Social Studies Education at Plymouth State University. Kelsey is President of the New Hampshire Council for the Social Studies and President of the remedial Her Story Project. Kelsey, great to have you. A big welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Jonathan Weinberg, a Concord School Board member for District B. Jonathan currently works for Civic Strategy Group as an organizer. He was selected as the New Hampshire 2021 Civic Leader of the Year from Stay Work Play and NHPR. Jonathan, a big welcome, and thank you also for coming.
Thanks, Laura.
So all of you, let's jump right into it. Let's begin with the question that is at the heart of this series, and that is, what is the heart of civic strength? And it's a big question, so we're going to break it down. Kelsey, I'm going to start with you. What's one word that immediately comes to mind with that question? What's at the heart of civic strength?
In a democracy, it has to be education.
Spoken like an educator, and obviously lots of components. So what in particular, Kelsey, makes you choose that word, education?
We need to educate our citizens in a democracy to understand how our system works, because they have to be active participants in that system in order for it to work. Our standards, and I think we all probably could agree that we need to talk about that people need to understand the rights that they have within our system of democracy, so that they can make sure they're not being exploited with those rights. Simultaneously, we also need to understand what our responsibilities as citizens are in a democracy. And that would include service and stepping up and, engaging in your community. Sometimes that service means military service. Sometimes that service means volunteer. So there's a lot of responsibilities that citizens in a democracy have, and you need both of those. You need to know your rights, and you need to know what your responsibilities are to your community. And that's different than other systems of government that are out there. I think most importantly in this climate, we need to teach our students how to engage civilly in discourse in a society where we have a lot of differences of opinion, differences of backgrounds, differences of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. And we need teachers in that system that are prepared to help students navigate those conversations.
Well, it's interesting to me, civil and civics sound a lot alike, so maybe there's a reason for that. And I want to turn to you, Pedro, too. How about you? What's a key piece of civic strength for you? Sort of, if you could put one word on it.
If I had to choose one word, I would have to say accountability.
So give us more on that, Pedro. That's really interesting. What's important about accountability to you as a part of civic strength?
Absolutely. So accountability in the last couple of years has certainly been used in the light of crime and punishment. And for this purpose, I want to kind of stretch that definition of accountability to responsibility. Oftentimes when we're talking about accountability, we're holding our legislators or people who have committed some kind of mistake or are lacking ownership of their decisions to own up and take responsibility for their actions. However, it's a lot more internal reflection in the terms of accountability that I want to share with all of you. And in terms of civic engagement in particular, not only are we interchangeably, I'm just going to use responsibility instead of accountability. As citizens of the state of New Hampshire, we're responsible for casting a ballot, in whichever vote that we have for a representative is us lending our faith that this representative is going to reflect and advocate for the lived experiences, the traumas that are currently happening within their communities. We have to make sure that that is their focus and not a special interest, but that they are advocating and pursuing legislative bills and legislative behaviors in the light of the constituencies with the greatest need. So as far as accountability, the reason I use that word in particular is we need to hold our legislators accountable for, oftentimes they're telling us to be accountable for, to get out and be more civically engaged, to be more involved in politics, to be more and volunteer in our town. We also have to kind of redirect that energy back to our legislators. We give them a position of heavy influence on the way that New Hampshire dictates its policy and controls culture and behavior. And we want to make sure that they are responsible and we hold them accountable for that power, in particular when we need them to represent our voices at this kind of very local level.
Wow.
And we need them in particular to also make sure that they get that job done that we have lended our faith for them to do.
So education, accountability. Jonathan, how about you? What's one word that comes up for you in terms of civic strength?
Absolutely, integrity.
So a little more there. Yeah.
I would say when individuals are civically engaged, it's really important to be true to who you are and true to yourself and true to your values. And with that, if you're voting for something, if you are getting involved, if you're an activist, it's important to not always get swept up in the moment, but always understanding why you started what you were doing in the first place and always going back to your why. And once you go back to your why and embrace that, then it makes it easier to feel more persuasive to others, as well as people are attracted to authenticity, and authenticity and integrity go very hand in hand.
So almost not backing off from what pulled you into that civic space in the first place. Is that what you're saying, Jonathan?
Absolutely. Always recognizing that there's always more to learn and that keeping yourself in a position that you can learn from others and others can learn from yourself.
So dialogue and communication, and that's kind of why we're here too, to have a dialogue with you guys and our wonderful audience here at the Franklin Opera House, as well as our audience online. And Mayor Brown, for you, civic strength isn't some sort of high-minded concept. It's a day-to-day issue for you as mayor. So what elements need to be present in a community to provide that fertile ground for civic strength? What do you think?
So I think the word that I would use is engagement, and it very nicely ties up everything that my fellow panelists have talked about. You need to be educated about what you want to be engaged in. You need to know the consequences of your action, and you need to believe in that engagement. You absolutely need to be accountable for what you're doing, for what you're believing, particularly if you're bringing other people with you, as in the leadership role or something like that. Absolutely, you have to have integrity. I think most of you know I'm a military veteran. That's key to most of the things that I think and do about. Bringing all that together, to me, is the definition of civic: being educated, being accountable, having the integrity, and absolutely being engaged. And I think it was wonderful, and I know the radio audience can't see this, but when Laura asked about how many of our audience members were either elected or volunteered or something, I think 3/4 of you put up your hands, and that's a real strength for us here in Franklin.
So Mayor Brown, you mentioned leadership. So what is the role of leadership in building civic strength? Obviously, leaders can't do it by themselves, but what's leadership's role?
I think it's important that leadership up the role, again, with integrity and willing to be accountable for what they're doing. But I also think, too, a very big part of leadership is listening. listening to other people, listening to other points of view, as Kelsey pointed out, being able to hear what people of different minds and likes and persuasions, whatever they are. And then when you have that kind of perhaps a reputation or perhaps a way that people say, hey, maybe I don't agree with Mayor Brown on all these things, but I know that she's going to tell me the truth. I know that she's probably maybe going to lead us in the right direction, or she'll help, find someone that can. We're seeing it in our city across the board. We're seeing it in civic programs that one of our counselors is running, trying to get a downtown business engaged in doing more. We're seeing it with another counselor who's helping me with a very major project of manufacturing in our schools. We're seeing it with counselors that are involved in the theater programs that we have, which has been key to our students here in Franklin. So a lot of the people that are involved, not only as elected, but also as volunteers, have shared those out among our community. That is what, in my opinion, makes Civic really strong for us, especially here in Franklin.
Pedro, I know you have some thoughts too on the role that leaders play in building civically strong communities, and what kind of leaders. It isn't just mayors and city councilors, it's business people, it's volunteers and so forth. So what kind of leaders help create civically strong cities and towns here in the state?
So oftentimes when we're thinking about civics, we're always exclusively thinking about our civic engagement, which is inalienable to our rights, and it's voting. But I would want to stretch the imagination here and want to propose that to be civically engaged is not just to exclusively vote, is to be very, very much engaged in what's going on in the politics of your community. And doesn't necessarily have to be politics of your community, just be what's happening, what's the buzz within your community. We look to our legislators, senators, governors, executive council as positions of leadership, when we can honestly dial that back. To be civically engaged is to be a town manager, is to be the mayor of a town, to be the lead librarian in your community. That's very, very essential to the way that a community thrives. We have to kind of make these positions of civic engagement culturally relevant, make it really cool for kids to look up to these people and say, I want to be able to have these responsibilities because I see the best interest in my community. I've been in my community my entire life, and I know where my community can go and has the potential to go to in the future. So those leaders in particular have an inalienable responsibility to, make it easier for people before them to come and assume their seats and, inspire the next wave of generations of people who will be civically engaged and engaged in their communities.
Kelsey, I know you have some thoughts also about leadership and how different types of leaders are needed for real civic strength.
Yeah, I think sometimes our definition of leader, it sort of lends to that person with the mic and at the podium who's speaking. And while those certainly can be leaders, I love to think and teach my students about ways to recognize that we all are leading. And I would love to shift our dialogue that listening, you mentioned listening before. Listening is leading. When you are silent and you're giving the floor to somebody who has a powerful voice, or maybe who has been silenced, right? And you just step back and you are quiet. I facilitate discussions and debates in my classroom all the time, and a lot of students are hesitant to speak up because so-and-so knows so much about that thing. And it's like, yes, that person does. Also, so do you, and your voice matters. And how great would it be if that person learned to listen to you for a minute? And I think that's really lovely. There's lots of theories on different styles and methods of leadership. My personal favorite is one that the National Outdoor Leadership School taught me when I was a Knowles student, which was they broke leadership into 4 quadrants. And one of them is that stereotypical, they're the driver, they're moving everybody forward. They're the person at the forefront. But kind of the antithesis of that is the people that are building the relationships on that team, that are keeping everybody united and empowered and following, right? And happy, right? Drivers don't make people happy. These people make people happy at following. in this theory, I would fall into the category of spontaneous motivator, right? I'm a coach, I'm an athlete, I'm a teacher. I motivate people to do stuff. And, Martin Luther King and probably Barack Obama and other people would have been in that category, these great speakers that just motivate people to do stuff. And the last category is analysts and architects. And these are people that are the brains of the operation. They're sort of the opposite of the motivators, and I'm married to one, so.
Something I wanted to just ask all of you, we're all talking about, the importance of listening and understanding and dialogue, but as you all know, just as well as I do, doesn't seem like we're in a great era for listening and dialogue and understanding. I'm going to throw this tough one to you first, Jonathan. I mean, what does one do when one cares about civically strong communities, but a big chunk of that community really doesn't seem to care or be interested?
And I think it goes back to the previous conversation with listening, but oftentimes we don't always define what active listening means. The idea of not necessarily coming up with a response in your head, but truly being involved in the moment and listening to the words that the other person is saying. Because when you actually listen, then you can fully feel and try and grow a sense of empathy and develop an idea of how the other person's view comes to fruition. And oftentimes I feel like when we discuss active listening, it's solely in the guise of, okay, I'm listening to what person says. A thought is developing. I'm getting my rebuttal. And it's a very
right.
debate, antagonistic relationship. But if we see it more in a symbiotic and more of like a sense of empowerment, going back to the leadership, then you're empowering the other person to speak their truth while at the same time understanding it. And then you can more understand where you're coming from. And that, I think, can help with all the polarization as well as discourse.
Yeah, I want to throw this to everybody, and then I want to start going to our audience, both online and here at the Franklin Opera House. But how about you, Pedro? How do you build civic strength when a lot of people don't really care?
Again, I think it definitely, the future of New Hampshire certainly depends on those who are uninterested and don't find that being engaged in politics and legislation is relevant to the path of their lives. But in order to remedy that, it's to inspire children at a very, very young level about what opportunities there are for them to kind of thrive in that scene. Oftentimes we don't talk about, besides income, we don't talk about the impact and the influence that these positions have. And the opportunities to work with different communities, with different people, with different ideas, with different solutions and challenges, and how that really kind of fulfills a lot of people. It fulfills our jobs. The same things that bring us happiness are the same things that will bring us the next set of challenges that'll determine whether or not this happiness is worth these challenges for. And so in order to kind of inspire the next youth, the next row of leaders, just to backtrack, we're not going to stay in the positions that we're in for the rest of our lives. There's going to be people, when our time is up and we have passed on, there are going to be people who are going to occupy our seats. And in order to inspire that next wave of people to do the job at the best of their ability and to pick up where we left off doing the good work, we need to inspire them at a very young age. We need to get into their schools and put an extra emphasis in civics, make it cool to be a town manager, make it cool to want to be a legislator and engage in different communities. There's a lot of benefits to being engaged in your community that stem far beyond a potential occupation, an internship, or an opportunity to engage in level of work that you would have never ever been involved with had you just stayed within your nucleus.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's being very open and honest about what's going on in your community, and also open and honest to yourself that you are a representative of this community, that your lived experience reflects that of many people in the same geography, and that if there's solutions and if there are problems that need solutions, then make sure that you get the right people who are going to be leaders to represent those things, to also would then turn around and say, I thank you for the invitation to this event, but I'm here without you needing to invite me to this. You need leaders who want to come back into the community, inform themselves, when, especially with the legislative body in the state of New Hampshire and the culture there, you have a lot of people saying, go to your legislators, contact them. The legislators also have a responsibility and need to be accountable for the communities that they represent. come back to the communities, go to the community centers, go to those potlucks, and not have to invite press or tell people that they're going, just to go because they are representatives of those community and they're supposed to amplify the problems, solutions, and ideas that you have here to the echo chambers of the State House.
So, often kids are encouraged to go into the STEM fields or maybe healthcare or definitely, a lot of kids want to maybe go into sports or entertainment. You're saying that's fine, but let's also talk to them about it's cool to be a town manager.
Absolutely.
It's cool to serve on the planning board. That's great. Mayor Brown, go ahead. Yeah, what do you do when everybody up here wants civically strong communities, but a lot of people aren't really interested?
I think a lot of what Pedro was saying, and certainly engagement and involvement is key, and real true engagement. But I think also there needs to be results. I think you need to show that for all this hard work that you've put in, for all these meetings that you all are missing tonight because you're here with us, that in fact things are still moving forward, that you've worked together and that you're beginning, if you haven't already, built a team that's going to continue that vision of that planning board or that zoning board or that water commission or whatever it is. And I think true leaders not only lead and listen, really listen, but they also have a vision. They also see a place of where to go and how things can be better than they are right now. Franklin's going through a lot of this right now. I think most of you are aware we have a wonderful whitewater park that's being installed here in our river. The vision of a young man that came into town with a plan, with a very solid plan, was able to engage a lot of local people to back him, to support him, and with their help, his vision expanded out through the levels of leadership in different organizations he could not possibly cover. And in that way has built this team. And then when we see that going on, well, maybe I could start a new restaurant here. And we've got 2 that are coming in the next few months. That's really exciting. Nice. Maybe I can do a course after school. And we've got 2 of our older citizens that are going to be teaching a culinary course and now are doing woodworking in our schools. When things begin to happen and you get comfortable with not always being the stepchild of the cities, if you will, then yeah, that can happen in Franklin. And that was one of my taglines when I opened up my business is good things can happen in towns. You have the results, you have the leadership, you spread that leadership out and you listen and engage.
So Kelsey, I want to hear from you on this as well. Creating civically strong communities when some people say, it's not for me, I don't have time, I don't care. Or quite frankly, I want to be civically involved, but it's kind of scary. There's a lot of criticism, there's social media and so forth. So I just wonder what you think there.
Be brave. That's my slogan that I share with social studies teachers working in this climate. I don't sit in a position like you do every day where I'm dealing with that, but I've faced a lot of criticism that I don't think had anything really to do with me and my job. But I think we need to be brave in this environment and stay, just true to that straight and narrow of this is, my purpose, this is my integrity. And especially to the social studies teachers out there and other teachers who feel sort of affronted by some of the things that have been going on in our society recently. I think we have to be brave.
Well, this is Building Civic Strength, a series of community conversations and a partnership in New Hampshire Civics and New Hampshire Public Radio. And a reminder again to our audience, both here at the Franklin Opera House and online, we welcome your comments. What do you think is at the heart of civic strength? Let us know. What knowledge, tools, and attitudes are needed to create civically stronger communities? Again, for our in-person audience, Michael Brindley will come around with the microphone. For our virtual audience, if you're participating online, put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And I'm delighted to say we already have several online questions and several comments from our audience. So let's go right to our physical audience here in Franklin. And good evening. Thanks for coming out. If you could give us our name and make your comment or question, please.
My name is Olivia Zink, and I live here in Franklin. And I believe our democracy is weakening. Erosion of civic norms are weakening. Extreme partisan politics are really facing our communities. It's growing. Do you believe the fate of our government lies in the hands of the citizens? Or do you think that our democracy is dying as well as leaders in Concord are making it harder to vote. An example is Senate Bill 418. Do you think we should restrict our rights and freedoms to vote?
Thank you, Olivia, for turning out tonight. And go ahead, Pedro. I can see you want to jump in on that one.
Absolutely. Thank
This
you,
is
Olivia.
yours.
That's an excellent question and way to preface it. That was excellent. I would have to say at some point, one of the best things that happened in the last presidential election, the one before, is sensationalized politics. You had kids who had no idea what was going on, asking questions about what was happening during the presidential race and the primaries, and lo and behold, now you have a big wave of people who are very interested in legislation and interested in politics. It's never been a more exciting time to have as many identities, the spectrum of people and personalities and identities, to come and be civically engaged beyond voting, becoming their next board of aldermen, being the next town manager, so forth. But to answer your question, what's going on is that we need our leaders to actually, for like the word that that Mayor Brown has mentioned, is results. At some point, the people who have been grueling, getting to the polls, trying to get people to the polls, trying to advocate and share information, they want results for their efforts. To be completely honest, being a millennial, I'm asking a lot of my friends, like I've had a lot of my friends who were very civically engaged before, not really looking forward to voting in general. And that's really, really disheartening, especially at the time when you have many states, including New Hampshire, who are trying to be reductive and trying to limit the accessibility to voting in general, when the legislative body in its essence here in New Hampshire is one of the most accessible legislative bodies and processes that I've ever experienced, and probably one of the most in the United States. We have 426 legislators who we bump into Shaw's without really realizing it. But it's super important to kind of understand that our votes are certainly being repressed in ways that they have never been before. But at the same time, the culture is trying to move into being more and more engaged. When you're looking at, when people who are voting are expecting results, this is where accountability and responsibility comes in. What I mentioned, the leaders who are in the positions of power that we're voting for need to come in with their promises. They need to commit to their promises and show us that our vote actually counted for something.
Getting back to that accountability and integrity that you talked about right at the beginning.
Yes.
Thank you for coming out tonight and for the question. And we have another member of our audience that we'd like to go to. Good evening. If you could just give us your name and go ahead with your comment or question, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Donna from Belmont. And I think one of the things that we can use in terms of community engagement is plays to some of our strengths. And one of those is by coming together, is finding the places where there's common ground, where there's interests that people can come, that have widely different views on other things, but can come together. And one of those things is the environment. And you can just look at the strengths that we have here in New Hampshire in terms of people and volunteers that are on boards and volunteers with our town conservation commissions, our county conservation districts, watershed associations, land trusts, the list goes on and on. So I think that's just one thing I was going to share and just wanted to get some response.
Yeah, I think that's great. And actually, Mayor Brown, I'm going to turn to you on that one because we do have these beautiful natural resources here in New Hampshire. I think you're right. That is a common point of interest for a lot of people in the Granite State. So go ahead, Mayor Brown, if you could talk, it kind of relates to what you said earlier, using what we have in common, what we love in common, our natural assets, and using that as a source of civic strength. I love that point. Thank you.
So again, as I mentioned, we've been very, very fortunate to be able to use really the same river that brought life to Franklin way back when, and that was the mills along the river, just in the mile area that will be part of our water park. There were 6 paper mills in the years gone by. So we're going back in essence to our roots. But what it's also doing, and again, because it's a younger kind of group of people that are putting this together. I mean, yes, they're getting help from the experienced people with the financing and the tax credits and all those kinds of things. But it is the young people, and anytime you want to move to Franklin, we're here on the environment. That see it more clearly because they're living it more than people, frankly, of my generation. And I know that it, again, as part of our water park, they're also developing a land component. And in that land component, they're putting things that will be exciting to young people, like a bike park, like a pavilion for performances and things like that. Those kinds of projects, and that's certainly not everything that's going on in New Hampshire, but those kinds of projects that can bring not only millennials, but the Gen X, the boomers, or whatever we are, together to work together. And again, see the results. I really think that's key. You can, if you're working all day and nothing ever happens, or we've always done it this way, we all know the trade lines, see it happening. And that is, again, is the beauty of what's going on here. And again, environmentally, I think we had to get 12 permits, I think, to finally get that approved for the river. But we did it. And our first feature is in, and I think that's very critical.
Well, and part of the focus of this series is focusing on younger Granite Staters, what skills, what knowledge they'll need to, as Pedro said earlier, take over those civic responsibilities and those civic jobs when the current generation filling those jobs has retired. So toward that end, here's a great question from our virtual audience. And Jonathan, I'm going to throw this to you, because I remember when you got involved in politics at Concord High School not that long ago. How can we recruit or inspire more younger folks to run for office? That's from our virtual audience. Thank you for the question. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I am the baby of the Concord School Board, probably. Baby of many different school boards. But I would say, going back to what Pedro was talking about, is meeting people where they are and understanding that it's not always fun or not always interesting, but finding ways to make it interesting. I know, going back to, as you were discussing in high school, after the shooting at Parkland, there was a big mobilization with young people getting involved, trying to go to state legislatures and advocate for common sense gun reform and gun violence prevention. And with that was kind of a new way of engaging with students. People were curious about meeting with legislators. They were curious about legislation. They were curious about politics and being civically engaged in general. And with that, it kind of allowed people who were already engaged to test out different opportunities as almost tasters. Maybe it was, we had a walkout, and that was a good first opportunity, not necessarily any political statement, but getting people to experience what it feels like to participate in a form of protest, participate in a walkout. This was sanctioned by the school, so it wasn't anything really. But it was a good opportunity for people to feel like it was more accessible. And then from there, we had another rally. Maybe then if they marched down the street, there's some chants. The people are asking for next steps for reform. That was a good opportunity for people then to take another step. And then after that, it was to go to the State House, to speak to legislators directly. So I think with that, it's very important to find incremental ways to introduce people to the political world and being civically engaged, and to do that in a way that it makes people feel comfortable with what they're doing, regardless of where they are in the political spectrum, because you can create opportunities for people who have differences and make them feel welcome. Just intentionality is so crucial.
Oh, that's interesting. So it isn't someone says to you, I'm upset about this, and you say, well, why don't you run for office? You baby steps. Why don't you come to this walkout? Why don't you come to this rally? Why don't you, Kelsey, I know you want to jump in here too. You're an educator. Yeah, to this great question from our virtual audience member. How can we recruit or inspire more younger folks to run for office? Go ahead, Kelsey.
I'm hearing a lot of themes in some of these questions about sensationalized politics and about feeling like our democracy is falling apart. And, you know, if I first wanted to just respond to those ideas, as a historian at Plymouth State, I have to just comment that a lot of what we're seeing is not new. It's just our generation is dealing with it now, new. And, you know, remember that right before the Civil War, like we had a senator who beat another senator with a cane on the floor, you know, like we're not there yet. So like, it's cool. But I share the alarm, and I share the frustration, and I share a lot of the sentiment when it comes to getting kids to engage in that. I think a lot of students that I have encountered in my career are confused. What are the adults doing? Right? I mean, I think that's the question. They are looking at us and being like, lead us, please, and model for us what this looks like. I also think to what you were just talking about, this issue of baby steps to getting them engaged. Educators play a really powerful role, not in facilitating walkouts necessarily, but I think in just showing them how you can engage. What I would do at my school when I taught high school government was I would walk all of the seniors to the town hall and we would register to vote together. That's very intimidating. They've never been in this building. They don't know what that is. Let's go see how that works. Let's fill out the form. And if you're not 18 yet, don't worry. Just look at the form. You can see what it looks like. And so when it's your birthday, you can come down and you can do that. I had a wonderful opportunity to take students to Washington, D.C. every single year for the National History Competition. And I was really proud of my school, and my students did really, really well. And we went and we met Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan and Kelly Ayotte when she was down there, and we shook their hands, and they got to talk to their senator and realize this is something that you can do. You can talk to them. This is a really cool way to show students and model students and bring them in. And I think educators can play a really nonpartisan, just show them how it works way, a role in a student's life and in their baby steps towards becoming engaged and facilitate not disengaging.
Jonathan, do you want to jump in real quick, and then we'll go back to our audience?
Definitely. And I think a big piece of that is representation and making sure that individuals in roles look like yourself. If you're able to see yourself reflected, then you're more likely to feel like it's accessible. As you were saying, when people met Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, they felt like, wow, I could be there. So it's important to get more people of color involved, people, different sexual orientation, different populations, so that people feel like the positions are accessible and that they can see themselves reflected and represented in these roles.
Okay, back to our audience here at Franklin's Opera House. Go ahead, sir. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, my name is Benji. I'm from Manchester. And as we get involved in our government and politics, we often get convinced that we are right and the other side is wrong. And Laura, when you started out with asking the people what one word, my word would have been humility. And so can you please talk about the role of humility and the willingness to change one's heart and mind in our civic discourse? If no one is willing to change their mind, we'll never get anywhere and get out of the impasse we're in. And how do we instill the value of humility in our society in a way that it's not a sign of weakness?
Wow, really good question. Thank you very much. Mayor Brown?
You make up a really valid point in humility, and boy, that's hard to come by. But I don't think it's impossible. And I think, again, if we can come together and show some result, that by being humble, by really listening to everybody else, by trying, as the old saying goes, walk in their shoes, and then see that, oh, it didn't hurt, and everybody actually did agree, because I didn't understand that you thought this, and I didn't know that you had this experience. And now I understand where you're coming from. I was talking with another one of our panelists earlier. I read a book about a woman growing up in a Black neighborhood in Chicago. And when I finished the book, it was like, I can't imagine what she had to go through as a young Black child in a Chicago neighborhood. So I think humility comes from listening. Humility comes from trying to experience what other people have lived through, in believing that they have in fact lived through those experiences, and willing to take the risk. I think somebody talked about that earlier, of stepping a little bit outside of our shells and saying, look, if we can all agree that for the common good, this moves us forward, even with our individualities, if we're humble enough to listen and choose and work together to bring it forward, then that, I think, is at least a step to moving forward and addressing our division.
Thank you for adding another word to those initial words that we put out at the beginning, accountability, education, dialogue, integrity. So humility. Go ahead, Pedro. I can see you want to jump in.
So with humility, we also have to understand that there needs to be a release of bias. So in order to really understand the other person on the other side, you have to, as Mayor Brown said, you have to believe them for their experiences they're saying that they've gone through. That is validation saying it to them that me as a legislator, I did not grow up in the west side of Manchester. And I know for a fact that I shouldn't be the appropriate person to be addressing the problems that that community is facing. So let me go and let me have humility and understand that my experiences really are in charge of the lens that I approach my life. And that is not the same for every person. Even within the same geography, there are people who live in very different experiences, different advice, different cultures and races. To have humility is to understand that you may never understand life the way that they have understood life. You don't have the same traumas, you don't have the same lived experiences, but you have to believe them from when they tell you, this is what I need. And your inalienable responsibility as a legislator or as a representative with that kind of influence is not to, speak on behalf of this person per se, but to pass them the microphone. They're the people who are going to tell you what we need in our communities. They're the ones who need to be believed. And they're usually the ones who are experiencing the troubles that you as a legislator are trying to champion. You can be a true champion, a true leader by stepping to the side and letting those people who are experiencing those issues speak for themselves.
Kelsey, go ahead.
I love this comment about humility. I think it's so important, but the way you phrased the question was how do we do that? So much has changed in social studies ed in the last decade, and the National Council for Social Studies has adopted a model of instruction called the inquiry model. It's really different than I think the way a lot of the people in this room probably were educated, where you had your teacher telling you the information that you needed to know, and then there was a test and you took that test and ta-da, yay you. Or maybe not, I don't know. It's a very different way that we are trying to educate students, and so much of that is lost in our dialogue about the classroom right now. The whole idea that teachers are telling students anything, I think is fundamentally flawed, in that what we're doing is we're facilitating their learning. We're not the sage on the stage, we're the coach on the side. We are providing them with multiple sources of information and giving them the skills and the tools to navigate those multiple sources and analyze them, to do the things like what Pedro was saying about releasing your bias, right? Adopting humility, acknowledging when the sources that we have available to us don't tell us everything that we need to know. There are so many ways in which this model of instruction helps to provide the how we create humility in our students, to acknowledge that they don't know everything.
Well, thanks again for all the questions from our audience here and our audience online. Again, this is Building Civic Strength, a series of community conversations and a partnership of New Hampshire Civics and New Hampshire Public Radio. Now, this is a 5-part series that we're kicking off tonight at the Franklin Opera House. For more information about the series, including where we'll be next, go to nhcivics.org or nhpr.org. And along with our audiences, a reminder that our guests are Pedro Altagracia, civic engagement advocate, who worked for more than a decade on a variety of issues here in New Hampshire. Joe Brown, Mayor of Franklin, and a longtime downtown business owner. Kelsey Brooke Eckert, coordinator of social studies education at Plymouth State University and president of the New Hampshire Council for the Social Studies, and Jonathan Weinberg, a Concord school board member. Jonathan currently works for Civic Strategy Group as an organizer. Here's another question from our virtual audience that kind of gets into what we were talking about before, but I do want to acknowledge it. And maybe to Mayor Brown, cross-bridge conversations are difficult when only one side is willing to engage.
Or willing to listen. And it kind of goes back to what we've talked about all along this. It's really hard sometimes when you have an image as in a leadership role that people always expect you either to say the right thing or certainly know what's going on. And it's hard to say, well, I didn't grow up in the West End of Manchester. I can't identify with what you're talking about. So you would hope that say someone like me would have the sense to say, okay, over to you. And actually, interesting enough, in our last council meeting, we sort of had the whole redistricting thing. And we have a counselor that is spot on this. This has been what she's been doing. She asked a question a little bit earlier. And I couldn't do redistricting just because of the math involved. But that's her thing. And several of our people in the town and in the city of Franklin have these skills that I think leaders need to recognize. Again, to Pedro's point, you step aside. That is being a leader, because that's letting the real information, the more accurate information probably, without a bias, because that's what they know about. So I would say that is how we need to work on that.
Well, the second part of this question, actually, again, cross-bridge conversations are difficult when only one side is willing to engage. This person asks, how do you encourage folks to step up?
So I think when we talked a little bit about it too, you take the baby steps that Jonathan talked about, and you invite them to become a part of the planning board. Actually, that's how I got started here in Franklin. I was asked to consider being on the planning board. I know several folks in the audience have that same experience. And then you say, okay, I made that decision that made this work for this family, this business, this whatever, or if you're on zoning, or if you're on a water issue or something like that. And then you can say back and say, I was a part of that decision that helped the community, that help us grow, that made us stronger. And I think then you start to build, then you start to get the confidence, and you see the result of what it is that you're a part of. So I absolutely agree that the baby steps, get involved in however way you want to. There's very, very many opportunities. Just let us know, and we'll figure out a way. And then grow as you will, as you become more confident. And then as you build on that, that's how I think you could do it.
Another question from our audience, and thank you for coming out, and go ahead and ask your question, please.
Hi, my name is Jeff from Plymouth, New Hampshire. Tough conversations these days can feel like a minefield of saying the wrong thing. Whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, it seems like when you speak up, people might jump on you and attack your character. So we keep saying, we want to hear your voice and we want to hear your perspective. But then it seems like once we invite those timid people to speak up, sometimes they get pounced on. So how can we avoid this hypocrisy and this trap and really empower people's voices that are maybe a little timid?
Yeah, I wonder if that's why some people aren't running for office, because they don't want to be, as you so well put it, pounced on. Who wants it? Pedro, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. So I would encourage people to respond over react. React oftentimes have us behave in the light of our feelings, and our feelings are suggestions, they're not commandments. So I would suggest that people respond. So in terms of hearing views of dissent that do not align with your core values, oftentimes people want to, in the arena of politics, they want to go from sweet to sour right away. They are influenced by their feelings and their true passion, which is great. We want that passion for that civil discourse, but we have to protect the integrity of the discourse in and of itself, especially when we're talking about the will of the group. We want to talk about what is the greatest benefit for passions. There's a lot of people who are very fired up about this because this is their lived experience. So when people arrive and come as they are, they come with that passion. So it's oftentimes very, very important to kind of keep that in mind, that you want to have, oftentimes for hard words, a soft landing place. So
not easy. Thank you for the question. Jonathan, I can see you want to jump in on that as well.
I would say this absolutely ties in with the question about humility and recognizing and taking a step back, as Pedro was talking. We live in a very reactive climate where if anyone has any political idea, it's easy to pounce or just feel like your way is the right way. And it's easy to then push back into your ideological shell. And it's so important then, as Pedro was saying, to respond, and also as a question, to bask in that humility and recognize that there are different opinions, and that is okay. It's valid. And once you recognize and embrace humility, it makes it easier then to move into that position of responding and not reacting.
I want to turn to the specific topic of civics education itself. And so Kelsey, I'll go to you first on this. One of our online audience members asks, do we need more than a half-credit civics course in high school. I know you're the one for this. Should we be requiring more civics education in our elementary and middle school? So I think I can guess what you're going to say, Kelsey, but go ahead.
A half credit to graduate high school and 0 credits required prior to high school. That's what the state law in New Hampshire requires. Certainly it's integrated through middle school and elementary education programs. But social studies in general is under attack in all of those places. In elementary school, social studies classes are scheduled at certain times of the day where it could be easily canceled for an assembly, or it's on a Monday so that it always lands when there's a federal holiday. Things like that are happening across our state that are systematically attacking the social studies at large. What's really hard about the social studies, which is where our civic teachers come from, is it encompasses 7 different subjects. I'm certified to teach 7 different subjects, which at the college level, those are 7 different departments, right? So that I think is problematic. And when we say, okay, well, we got to get government poli-sci, that's my major, we need to get that in, let's do it in half a semester. Think about that. That's my entire major, and you're going to break it down into half a semester for our graduates? That's unbelievable. So of course, the point there is incredibly important, but I think it's beyond just the law. I mean, schools are limited. They can't, the school can't be entirely social studies, but we can find ways to prioritize it and make the social studies not the ugly stepchild of the core subjects in the schools. This is a very important subject. Obviously, it's my job, it's my life, it's what I do. But we're sitting here and we're lamenting the situation out there. To the question that was previously asked about, how do we get people to not pounce on other people? We do that through more civics education. We need to not be shying away from debates in our schools. We need to give children the place to practice these debates, the place to say something that maybe offended somebody in the room. Thank you. And give the children in the room a chance to practice responding to that kindly, right? There are lots of strategies that teachers can use in the classroom, and one of my favorites is oops and ouch. It's
Oops
really
and ouch.
Oops and ouch. You say something that offends me, Pedro, and I say ouch, and then it gives him a chance to say, oops, my bad. We don't give each other the oops opportunity enough in our culture.
We
to
just get
say,
outraged. We
now
don't
it's
say,
now
yeah.
it's your
Yeah.
whatever labels I can put on that, and we move on. And I think that's where our media plays a really big role, and not sensationalizing things, and giving that person who said something wrong a chance to say oops.
That's really interesting. So as many of the questions that have come in have said, and many of you have said, as we sort of lament the state of our civic or our political life, you're saying, Kelsey, more civics education beyond half a credit would help help to start repair some of these problems that we're all talking about. Real quick, Pedro, and then Jonathan. Yeah.
I really want to highlight Kelsey's word in saying practice. And I would even argue saying that we are engaged in civics or in advocacy way before we even know what the word really means. How many times have you had in your home, for example, your brother or your sister, your mom doesn't let you have more than 1 cookie after dinner. And you're just like, man, that's not fair, man. I want another cookie after dinner. What are you going to do? You're going to organize with your siblings in order to kind of, assess what the situation is. All right, mom gets home at 4. She's usually pretty cranky by 5. And by 6, she is relaxed and like in the close. So the best time to engage with her would be at 6. These are just kind of strategies, and it's funny, but it's super true. How many times we have advocated for ourselves to our parents, or have had, even in our teenage years, have views of dissent against the cultures of our parents, especially if we're from any immigrant populations. I was here raised in America. My parents are of Dominican descent. So I was the apex. It was the experience for them, their first experience of having someone who is contracting and conflicting against their traditional values. And I'm here having to advocate for myself and my experiences in order to have them understand and meet me halfway and meet me where I am. It's the same thing here, is we want to make sure that we tell our children, it's like, hey, like, this is something that you are supposed to do. When we are encouraging our kids to apply to jobs, at the interview is an opportunity to advocate and market for yourself. The same attitude needs to be represented everywhere that we go. We're advocating for other people, advocating for ourselves, advocating for what we believe in. We need to kind of just broaden the eyes to what advocacy really is, and have people understand that you're an advocate for your experiences and the experiences that you share and identify with other people. Practice that, and that is being civically engaged, is to understand your community, understand yourself, and how you are and what your role is within that community.
And if it means more cookies, I'm all in.
Oh yeah, all the time.
So Jonathan, to you real quick too, because again, you're on the Concord School Board, so concerning education, you got involved in some of these issues as a high school student. What skills or knowledge or just basic coursework in civics do you think young people need to take on these roles as young adults?
I am a big proponent in experiential learning, and I think in New Hampshire, people have a very unique opportunity with it being the first in the nation primary, regardless of whether it stays that status. But currently, growing up in Concord, I was able to meet every different presidential candidate, which is wild. I remember when I was younger and my friends who might have went to private schools, they joked about participating in mock trials, and they're like, I'll pretend to be Hillary Clinton. I'll pretend to be Donald Trump, pretend to be Bernie Sanders. I was like, I got to meet all of them. We don't need to pretend, because they come to our schools. We get to engage with the policymakers at hand. And I think when you're able to provide this outlet where students are able to meet those who make these decisions, who are in these leadership positions, it helps people whet their appetite almost, and find a place in the political world. And that's where New Hampshire is very unique, and individuals can meet these people who come here every 4 years, and it becomes the visual token of the country. And it was a wild experience. And I think through experiential learning and providing these opportunities, it is a great opportunity to get a more civically engaged population.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned New Hampshire specifically, because I did want to ask the rest of the panel as well about just opportunities here in the Granite State, unique aspects of life in our state that do allow us, like the primary, to perhaps become more civically aware, civically engaged. So Mayor Brown, to you, what aspects of life here in New Hampshire might be better harnessed to bolster civic health?
There was a wonderful series that Yankee Magazine did a few years ago called The Feeling of Place. And I think for a lot of New Hampshire, and of course I grew up here, there's a sense that we are New Hampshire. Of course, according to the political, we are the #1, because we really do vet the candidates. I mean, if you don't want to be involved, that's your choice. But if you want to be involved, there's a million opportunities to do that. So I think to all the points that my fellow panelists have made, the being engaged, being involved, I loved the oops and the ouch thing. I think that was really something. But again, to have the opportunity to learn, to make mistakes, to do it at a young age, to do all of that, I think that's where we need to focus and move forward with our folks here in New Hampshire.
Well, and to follow up just a little bit on some of the things you've said, we got a comment from one of our online audience members. Many people don't understand how being involved can help them. Some just vote for president, but don't understand how all the town meetings that go on weekly consolidate into March town meetings. This person says local politics can be extremely important. Certainly here in New Hampshire, right, Mayor Brown, there's ample
Absolutely.
opportunity to be involved in local politics. Slightly different wording of the question for you, Pedro. It's often said that our unusually large legislature makes it so easy to be civically engaged here in New Hampshire. I wonder what your views are on that.
So we have a tremendous opportunity here within this state to really have the most equitable, most accessible legislative body in the country. Let alone we have the 3rd largest English-speaking legislative body in the planet. We also have a processes where every single bill gets a hearing. You know, that's incredible.
That is unusual.
That's unusual. Yeah. Talk to any other, state and they'll be like, you're nuts. Like we don't have time for that. But here in the state of New Hampshire, in the Constitution, we make time for every single bill. And they're open to the public. People can come in during some of the sessions. They can come in and sit on there. People can come, and see the floor votes. people can do these things. They can be engaged in this process, which is incredible. You know, we have our legislators' public information about where they've studied, where they've been, you know, what businesses, what colleges, their numbers, their addresses, all accessible to the public without fear of any repercussions. They are there and accessible for us to grab onto. And yes, I would encourage all legislators to go and meet in their communities, but also all the constituents who say they don't have an impact. It is the shortest distance between two people is a story. And oftentimes we have to recognize that the legislators don't know what they don't know. And considering that they are not being paid for their positions, they are wealthy. They are people who have regular 9 to 5, have businesses, have other endeavors that would allow them to be at the State House from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And the experiences of the people who they need to be catering to are people who don't have that privilege and have that luck. So in order for us to really, truly kind of understand our legislative process, we understand that they're giving their information to us, and it's our duty to go to them and saying, hey, I want to have a coffee with you. Can we go bowling? Can we just talk about things? I would love to talk about things in my community. And they have to listen because you rested your faith when you voted for them to do that. And if they don't do that, they're not responding to your emails or your voicemails, or they don't engage with the community, or they're nowhere to be found, then you hold the power. And that's what it's a reminder that we are the people who put those people in the positions of power. We are the ones who are voting for them. So if they're not doing the job that we voted them to do, then I don't need to tell you. You know exactly what to do when it comes to voting. So yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that every bill gets a hearing, because I had not thought about that. We often talk about, wow, there's all those lawmakers. You can vote them in, you can vote them out. But even at the more granular level, you're right. Every bill gets a hearing. So that's another
Absolutely.
unique opportunity in this state.
Yes,
I'm really
and-
glad you mentioned that.
And one thing I'll mention is your representatives are people who own businesses. They are exactly like you guys. They don't need no special education. They didn't have to do poli-sci. A lot of them are people who were just in a small town with enough people, and it's like, hey, would you vote for me? And it was like, yeah, sure, I'll vote for you. And then they wrote their names out, and boom, they're a legislator. So you don't have to have any, you don't have to be a master of your expertise or a master of your lived experience to be a legislator. You just have to be someone who cares enough about their community to represent and advocate for your community.
Well, Kelsey, I want to ask you too, what aspects of New Hampshire community life, political life, whatever, do you see as either adding to civic strength or even detracting from civic strength?
I love that New Hampshire is a pretty purple state. I think that's one of the things that is so special about it. And to some extent, I think despite the sensationalism, we value that there are people living right next door to us that we might disagree with. And, you know, we have this sort of libertarian streak that runs through us, that crosses through the liberals and the conservatives. And I think that's really special. And I think it creates educationally an amazing opportunity to have really meaningful discussions and practice is in the classroom. I think that, I mean, if you walk into any coffee shop in any town in New Hampshire, people are talking about politics. And why not prepare students for those conversations that are happening in our state all the time? And because we're first in the nation right now, we are the place that people come to. We vet. And so, and then people are engaged in that process. And so we need to prepare our students to know how to do that well. I mean, I said before, but we need to, I think the more controversial the discussion, the better in the classroom, where you can fail, right? Where you can be wrong and it's okay, so long as that culture is created by the teacher and, you know, reinforced in the strategies and whatever that they're using in the classroom. But we want our students to have those conversations because, you know, to pick probably the most controversial, whatever, it doesn't matter, insert controversial topic here. When they mess up in the classroom, they're prepared. I mean, don't you want them forming opinions on that? Don't you want them taking the ethics and the morality that they've learned in their home and putting it in practice and testing it on a real thing, right? And shouldn't we as parents say then, how did that go today? What position did you take on that? That's interesting. I would love to hear where you landed on that. And then if I really disagree with you, dinner will be interesting. You know, but like,
No cookies.
no cookies. But I think, that comes into parenting too. And we can help facilitate and foster these same conversations that teachers are trying to foster in the classroom. We can foster those at the dinner table.
Well, we could talk a lot longer, but that is all the time that we have for our conversation this evening. But there are many more events to come. So if you want to learn more about this series, including where we're going to next, go to nhcivics.org or nhpr.org for the next in our series about building civic strength here in the Granite State. I really want to thank our panelists for coming out this evening. Pedro Altagracia, Joe Brown, Kelsey Brooke Eckert, and Jonathan Weinberg. Also to our audience, both here in Franklin and online, thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.